Detective Margaret Meg Thompson stared at the envelope on her desk. It looked ordinary enough, plain white paper with her name typed in basic black letters. What made it strange was that it had appeared on her desk inside the secure New Columbus police station on Mars, with no record of how it got there. She picked up the envelope carefully, remembering her evidence handling training. Even after 15 years as a detective, old habits died hard. The paper felt real, actual Earth-made paper, not the synthetic stuff they used on Mars. That alone made it unusual. "Hey Bob, come look at this," she called to her partner, Robert Anderson, who sat at the desk across from hers. Bob walked over, his heavy boots making hollow sounds on the station's metal floor. He was a big man with graying hair who had been on Mars longer than most. "What have you got there, Meg?" he asked, leaning over her shoulder. "Not sure yet. Found it on my desk this morning." She opened the envelope slowly, using a letter opener. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in typed words. As she read, her face grew pale. Bob noticed the change in her expression. "Meg, what is it?" She cleared her throat and read aloud. "Detective Thompson, by the time you read this, 3 members of the Colonial Council have already been replaced. They look human. They act human, but they are not human. Check the Council's voting records for the past month. Look for Council Member Davis's vote on the defense grid upgrade. He voted against it. Davis has never voted against a security measure in his entire career. This is only the beginning. They are watching. They are waiting. Just like they did in Circleville all those years ago. The coordinates at the bottom of this letter will lead you to proof, but be careful who you trust. They can look like anyone now. A friend." At the bottom of the page was a string of numbers, coordinates for somewhere on Mars' surface. Bob whistled low. "Sounds like someone's been reading too many conspiracy stories," he said, but Meg was already pulling up Council Member Davis's voting record on her computer screen. Her hands froze over the keyboard. "Bob," she said quietly, "Davis did vote against the defense grid upgrade last week." "Could be a coincidence," Bob said, but he didn't sound convinced. Meg shook her head. "I'm going to run some checks on this paper. Real paper on Mars. That's expensive. Maybe we can trace where it came from." She was about to put the letter in an evidence bag when she noticed something else. Under strong light, hidden words appeared in the paper's watermark. "Remember Circleville, Ohio, 1976. Bob, what do you know about Earth history? Specifically, about a place called Circleville?" Bob thought for a moment. "Small town in Ohio, I think. There was some famous case there, back in the 20th century. Something about threatening letters that were never solved." Meg felt a chill run down her spine. She looked out the office window at the red Martian landscape stretching to the horizon. The massive dome of New Columbus protected them from the harsh environment outside, but suddenly it felt less secure than it had that morning. She made 3 decisions right then. First, she would check those coordinates. Second, she would look into the history of Circleville, Ohio. And third, she would tell no one else about the letter. Not yet. As she locked the letter in her secure drawer, her computer beeped. A new message had just arrived. The subject line read, "I see you got my letter. Here's what you need to know about Davis." Meg glanced around the office. Through the glass walls, she could see other officers going about their day. One of them could be watching her. Any of them could be something else. She turned back to her computer and began to read. Robert Anderson sat at his desk, surrounded by 3 floating computer screens. His eyes were tired from staring at data for the past 6 hours. But what he found made the headache worth it. "Meg," he called out, his voice echoing through the nearly empty office. It was late in the Mars evening, and most officers had gone home. "You need to see this." Detective Thompson hurried over, a cup of coffee in her hand. She hadn't slept much since receiving the strange letter 3 days ago. "What did you find?" "I've been checking other colonial stations for similar reports," Bob said, pointing to one of his screens. "Look at this. In the past month, Luna Colony got 2 letters. The Europa Research Station got 1. Even the mining outpost on Ceres got a letter. Meg leaned closer, her coffee forgotten. Are they the same as mine? Not exactly, Bob said, pulling up images of the other letters. But they all mention Circleville, and they all warn about people being replaced. Here's the weird part. They're all written on real paper. Meg pulled up a chair. Show me everything. Bob touched his screen, and the data spread out in front of them. Each letter arrived right before something strange happened. On Luna, 2 days after their letter arrived, the head scientist changed his mind about a major research project. On Europa, their letter came just before 3 security officers suddenly resigned. And all the letters mentioned Circleville. Meg asked, every single one. But here's what's really strange, Bob said, bringing up another document. I found records of the original Circleville letters from Earth. The writing style matches perfectly. Not just similar. Perfect. Like they were written by the same person. That's impossible, Meg said. Those letters were written almost 300 years ago. A soft beep interrupted them. One of Bob's screens showed a new message. His face went pale as he read it. What? Meg asked, moving to see his screen. It's about Davis, Bob said quietly. He's dead. They found him in his apartment an hour ago. Meg felt her heart speed up. Natural causes. They don't know yet, but get this. His neighbor said she saw him enter his apartment this morning. The medical team says he's been dead for at least 2 days. They both sat in silence, letting that sink in. Finally, Meg spoke. The coordinates in my letter. We need to check them now. Bob nodded, already pulling up a map. They point to an old storage facility, about 20 kilometers outside the dome. It's been abandoned since the dust storms last year. Can we get there? I've got access to a surface rover, Bob said. We could be there in 2 hours. Meg stood up, checking her service weapon out of habit. Let's go. But Bob, don't tell anyone where we're going. They made their way to the vehicle bay, trying to act normal. The night shift workers barely looked up as Bob signed out a rover. As they put on their surface suits, Meg noticed Bob's hands shaking slightly. Having second thoughts, she asked. Bob checked his oxygen gauge. Remember in the old movies, when people would split up to investigate something scary? And you'd think they were stupid. Meg nodded. Well, now I get it. Sometimes you have to do the scary thing because not knowing is worse. They sealed their helmets and entered the airlock. As it cycled, Meg thought about the letter in her desk drawer. About Davis being dead, but somehow seen alive. About identical letters spanning 3 centuries. The airlock opened to the Martian night. Stars shone brilliantly above them in the black sky. Somewhere out there, more letters were appearing. More people were being replaced, and she and Bob were about to drive into the dark to find out why. The rover's engines hummed to life. Through her helmet radio, Bob's voice came clear. Ready? Meg looked at the coordinates on her display. Ready. Let's go see what's out there. The rover rolled forward into the Martian night, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Behind them, New Columbus glowed like a fallen star. Ahead, only questions waited. Jennifer Miller didn't like the basement levels of the Mars Colonial Archive. The lights were always too dim, and the rows of data servers made strange humming sounds. But today, she wasn't alone. Detective Thompson and Bob Anderson stood with her, watching as she accessed the oldest section of Earth's historical records. Most people don't know we keep paper copies down here, Jennifer said, using her keycard to open a heavy metal door. The digital archives can be changed or hacked, but paper? Paper tells the truth. The room they entered was cold and dry to protect the documents. Their footsteps echoed as they walked between tall shelves filled with boxes. Here, Jennifer said, pulling out a dusty box labeled Circleville, Ohio, 1976 to 1977. These are copies of the original letters. We're one of only 3 places that still have them. Meg picked up the first letter carefully. The paper was yellow with age, but the words were still clear. Bob looked over her shoulder as she read. The writing style. It's exactly the same as my letter, Meg said, her voice barely a whisper. Jennifer nodded. That's not all. Look at this. She pulled out her tablet and showed them a scan of another letter. This one was sent to Luna Colony last week. The sentence structure, the word choice, it's identical. It's like whoever wrote the original letters is still writing them today. Could someone be copying the old style? Bob asked. I thought of that, Jennifer said. But there's something else. She pointed to a mark on the corner of the original letter. See this symbol? It looks like a small circle with a dot in it. Every original Circleville letter had it. Meg quickly pulled out the letter from her pocket. There, in the same corner, was the same symbol. That's impossible, Bob said. These new letters are being written hundreds of years after the originals. Jennifer turned on a special light on her tablet. Under ultraviolet light, the symbol glows. But here's the strange part. It glows differently in each letter, like it's changing over time. Suddenly, the lights flickered. All 3 of them looked up. Just the old wiring, Jennifer said, but she didn't sound sure. Meg walked to another shelf and ran her finger along the boxes. You said the digital archives can be changed. Has anyone accessed these paper records recently? Jennifer checked her tablet. That's another weird thing. According to the logs, no one has opened these boxes in over 10 years. But she stopped. But what? Bob asked. Last night, I found this on my desk. Jennifer reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. It says, the truth isn't in what the letters say. It's in when they were written. The lights flicker again, longer this time. When they came back on, all 3 of them were looking at the shadows between the shelves. Show me the dates, Meg said. When exactly was each original letter sent? Jennifer pulled up the records. As they looked at the dates, Bob's face went pale. That can't be right, he said. But it was there in black and white. The original Circleville letters weren't sent in order. The last letter was dated before the first. Some were dated on days that didn't exist in 1976. There's more, Jennifer said, her voice shaking slightly. I found references to Circleville letters in records from 1842, 1923, and 2001. Always the same style. Always with that symbol. The lights went out completely this time. In the darkness, they heard footsteps between the shelves. When the emergency lights came on, there was a new letter sitting on the table in front of them. The envelope was addressed to all 3 of them. And in the corner was that same circle with a dot. Meg reached for it, but Bob grabbed her hand. Wait, he said. Look at the postmark. Jennifer shone her tablet light on the envelope. The date stamp read, July 15, 2248. That was tomorrow. William Bill Parker sat alone in his office at Colonial Security Headquarters. The lights of New Columbus shone through his window, creating shadows on his desk. He stared at the letter in his hands, reading it for the 5th time. The security cameras in his office were off. He had checked 3 times. What the letter said about his private conversations, things only he and Governor Wilson had discussed in his secure room, made his hands shake. His phone buzzed. Detective Thompson was calling again. He had ignored her last 4 calls, but this time he answered. Chief Parker, Meg's voice came through. We need to talk about the letters. Bill looked at the paper in his hand. Come to my office. Bring Anderson and that archive worker, Miller. Use the back entrance. Don't tell anyone you're coming. 20 minutes later, they sat in his dark office. The only light came from the city outside. They're called the messengers, Bill said, holding up his letter. At least, that's what they call themselves. Who are they? Bob asked. Not who. What? Bill turned on a small desk lamp. According to this letter, they're shapeshifters. They can look like anyone. And they're already here. Jennifer Miller pulled out her tablet. The archive records show similar claims in the original Circleville letters, but everyone thought it was just someone playing pranks. It wasn't pranks, Bill said. Look at this. He pressed a button on his desk, and a screen lowered from the ceiling. A video began to play. It showed Governor Wilson in a meeting room. She was alone, reading papers. Then she stood up, and her whole body seemed to ripple like water. A moment later, a different person stood in her place. This is from my private security feed, Bill said. No one else has access to it. Meg leaned forward. When was this recorded? 3 days ago. The real Governor Wilson is fine. She's on Earth for a conference. This one, he pointed to the screen, has been attending all her meetings. Why show us this? Bob asked. Why not tell Colonial Defense? Bill laughed, but there was no humor in it. The letter explained that too. Show them, Miller. Jennifer pulled up an old newspaper article on her tablet. The headline read, Circleville Sheriff found dead after warning about imposters. Every time someone tried to expose them, they disappeared, Bill said. But this time is different. The letters say we have a chance to handle this right. Suddenly, the desk lamp went out. In the darkness, they heard a sound like water moving. Nobody move, Meg whispered, her hand on her weapon. The city lights outside showed 4 shadows on the wall, but there were only 3 people facing Bill. Behind you, Bob shouted. Bill spun around. Where his bookshelf had been, a figure stood. It looked human, but its edges were blurry, like a photo out of focus. We mean you no harm, the figure said. Its voice sounded like many voices speaking together. We are here to help. Help with what? Meg asked, her weapon drawn. To prevent what is coming, the figure said. Just as we tried to warn them in Circleville. Just as we have tried to warn humanity many times before. The figure stepped forward, and they saw its face, or rather, faces. Features shifted and changed like clouds in wind. The letters were never threats, it said. They were warnings. And now, we have run out of time to send warnings. Bill found his voice. What do you mean? Look outside, the figure said. They turned to the window. In the night sky above Mars, stars were disappearing, as if something huge and dark was passing in front of them. They are here, the figure said. The ones we have been trying to warn you about. The ones who ended Earth and all the other timelines. The lights of New Columbus flickered once, twice, and went out. In the darkness, the shapeshifter's voice came one last time. Now you understand why we had to hide among you. The real fight is about to begin. The surface rover bounced over the red Martian rocks as Meg drove toward Phobos Research Station. Behind her, Bob checked their oxygen levels while Jennifer studied old documents on her tablet. Chief Parker sat in the front passenger seat, his eyes on the dark shape that now blocked half the sky. 10 minutes to the station, Meg said through her helmet radio. The abandoned research facility sat on a hill ahead of them, its metal walls covered in red dust. The messenger said we find answers here, Bill reminded them. About the letters, about them, about everything. They parked near the airlock. The station had power. A small green light blinked above the door. Bob typed in the emergency access code, and the door slid open with a hiss. Inside, after going through decontamination, they found the station surprisingly clean. No dust, no signs of abandonment. This place wasn't abandoned, Jennifer said, looking at the active computer screens. It was hidden. They followed the lit pathway deeper into the station. The corridors led them to a large round room filled with strange equipment. In the center stood a tall metal ring, big enough for a person to walk through. Look at this, Bob said, pointing to a computer screen. Project Timeline. Started in 1975 in Circleville, Ohio. Meg walked to the screen. That's 1 year before the first Circleville letters appeared. Jennifer connected her tablet to the computer. Files began opening automatically. These are research logs. They were studying time travel, but not the kind we think of from movies. What do you mean? Bill asked. They found a way to send consciousness through time, to put your mind in another body in the past or future. Jennifer's voice shook as she read. The first test was in 1976, but something went wrong. A new voice spoke from the doorway. Nothing went wrong. Everything happened exactly as it needed to. They turned to see the messenger, its shape now more clearly human, but still shifting slightly. "You're from the future," Meg said. It wasn't a question. The messenger nodded. "We are what humanity becomes after the Great Darkness. Those ships up there," it pointed upward, "they destroy Earth, Mars, everything. In every timeline we've seen, humanity falls. Except one. The Circleville timeline," Jennifer whispered, still reading the files. "Yes. In 1976, the first consciousness transfer created a loop. We've been trying to prevent the invasion ever since, jumping from time to time, body to body, sending warnings." Bob stepped forward. "The letters were written by us, across many times, trying to prepare humanity. But we couldn't just tell you everything. You had to discover it yourself. Had to be ready." Suddenly, alarms began blaring. The screens showed multiple objects entering Mars' atmosphere. "They're landing troops," Bill said, checking the radar, "all around New Columbus." The messenger walked to the metal ring. "This is the original device. We've kept it running, hidden, waiting for this moment." It touched the ring and it hummed to life, filling with swirling blue light. "What moment?" Meg asked. "The moment when humanity chooses to change its own past, to break the loop." The messenger looked at each of them. "One of you must go back to Circleville, back to where it all started. But this time, with the knowledge of what's coming." Through their helmet radios, they could hear panic from New Columbus. The invasion had begun. "How do we choose?" Jennifer asked. The messenger held up an envelope. "One last letter. You don't choose. You already chose, 300 years ago." It handed the letter to Meg. The envelope was old, yellow with age. She opened it and found a single photograph inside. It showed a woman standing in front of a building in Circleville, Ohio. The date stamp read, July 15, 1976. The woman in the photo was Meg. Meg stared at the old photograph in her hands. Outside the research station, the sound of distant explosions echoed across the Martian surface. The invasion had begun, but time seemed to stand still in the room with the glowing blue ring. "I don't understand," she said. "How can that be me in 1976? The messenger touched the metal ring, making the blue light pulse brighter. "You haven't gone back yet. But you will. You must." Bob stepped closer to look at the photo. All this time, the letters were trying to lead us here, to this moment. "Not just the letters," Jennifer said, still reading from her tablet. "Listen to this. Project Timeline began when an unknown woman appeared in Circleville, warning of future dangers. She provided technology far beyond our current understanding." Jennifer looked up at Meg. "It was you. Will be you." Chief Parker's radio crackled. "Sir, the aliens have breached the dome in sectors 3 and 7. We need orders." Before he could answer, more messengers appeared in the room. Unlike the first one, these kept their shapes stable. They looked like normal people, except their eyes seemed to glow slightly. "We are the last survivors of humanity," one of them said. "We learned to change our forms to hide from the invaders. We've spent centuries trying to prevent this day." Another messenger stepped forward. "But we couldn't just tell humanity what was coming. Every time we tried that directly, people panicked. They made wrong choices. The invasion always succeeded." "The letters," Meg said, understanding growing. "You were preparing us slowly, making us look for answers ourselves." "Yes," the first messenger said. "And now we can show you what really happened. What will happen if we don't change it." The blue light from the ring spread out, filling the room with images. They saw Earth burning, Mars falling, the last humans hiding in caves and tunnels, changing their bodies to survive, learning to shift their forms over hundreds of years. We became what we are to survive, a messenger said. But we never stopped trying to prevent it. We learned to send our minds through time, looking for the right moment to change everything. Jennifer's tablet beeped with new information. There's more, she said. The invaders, they're not just attacking us. They're changing time itself. Every world they conquer gets erased from history. That's why the dates in the letters didn't make sense. More explosions rocked the station. Through the windows, they could see ships landing closer now. We don't have much time, the first messenger said. Meg must go back. She must become the woman who starts everything. But this time, with all the knowledge we've gathered across centuries of trying. What about us? Bob asked. What happens to everyone here? If Meg succeeds, this timeline will change. A new future will form. One where humanity is ready. Chief Parker's radio crackled again with sounds of fighting and panic. He turned to Meg. Whatever you're going to do it fast. We're losing the colony. The messengers gathered around the ring, their forms glowing brighter. We will hold them off, they said together. We will give you the time you need. Meg looked at her friends, at the photo of herself from the past, at the blue ring that could send her mind back through time. What do I need to know? She asked. The first messenger handed her a small silver device. Everything is in here. The technology, the warnings, the truth, but most importantly, it paused, its form flickering. You must find Mary Wilson in Circleville. Why her? Because Mary Wilson becomes Governor Wilson, the one they replaced first, the one who makes the choice that dooms humanity, unless you change it. Meg stepped toward the ring, feeling its energy pull at her. Behind her, she heard the station's doors breaking open. The invaders had found them. Remember, the messenger said as the blue light grew brighter, change the past, save the future. And Meg, when you get there, write the letters. Army Commander Thomas Hayes watched the battle from Colonial Defense Headquarters. The huge screen showed red dots spreading across New Columbus like a disease. Each dot was an alien ship. His soldiers fought bravely, but they were losing. Sir, a young officer ran in with a letter in his hand. This appeared on your desk. It's marked urgent. Thomas took the envelope. The paper felt old, but the ink was fresh. As he read, his hands began to shake. Get me Chief Parker, he ordered. And Detective Thompson. Sir, they're at Phobos Station. We lost contact 10 minutes ago. Thomas looked back at the letter. It described exactly what he was seeing now. The invasion, the fighting, the losses. But it also showed him something else. A way out. Send this to all commanders, he said, typing quickly on his computer. Fall back to the inner dome. Protect the quantum core at all costs. The quantum core was New Columbus's backup power source. According to the letter, it was much more than that. Across the colony, soldiers moved to new positions. The aliens, expecting them to defend the outer walls, seemed confused by the change. Thomas's screen lit up with a new message. It was from Phobos Station. But the timestamp made no sense. It was dated 300 years ago. To all colony leaders, he read aloud. By now you have received the final letter. You face a choice that humanity has faced many times before. In every timeline but one, we chose wrong. More messages appeared, each from a different time. They showed the same pattern. Humanity fighting alone. Humanity falling. Humanity changing into the messengers to survive. Sir, another officer called out. Chief Parker is on the line. Bill Parker's voice came through filled with static. Commander Hayes, listen carefully. The messengers, they're not our enemies. They're us. From a future we need to prevent. I know, Thomas said. I have their letters. But they're asking us to trust them completely. To give them control of our defenses, our technology, our future. Because they've lived through this moment before. Bill said. They know what happens if we don't. The battle paused as both sides waited. The aliens had surrounded the inner dome, but weren't attacking. They knew about the choice too. Thomas looked at his screens again. The quantum core was glowing brighter than normal. According to the letters, it could link with the device at Phobos Station. Together, they could change everything, or destroy everything. His radio crackled. A new voice spoke, not human, not alien, but somewhere in between. Commander Hayes, it said, I am speaking from your future. In my time, humanity survives, but we become something different, something that can fight back. We are offering you our knowledge, our changes, our evolution, but you must choose to accept it. Thomas thought about Earth, about Mars, about what it meant to remain human. The other timelines, he said, why did they fail? Because humanity chose independence over survival. They fought alone, died alone, and we had to watch it happen again and again. An explosion rocked the building. The aliens were getting impatient. Sir, his officer said, we need your decision. Thomas looked at the final letter one more time. At the bottom was a photograph. Himself, standing with Meg Thompson in Circleville, dated next week in 1976. He pressed the button to open all channels. To all colony citizens, we face a choice. Fight alone and fall, or accept help and change. For 300 years, our future selves have tried to warn us. This time, we're going to listen. He turned to his officers. Link the quantum core to Phobos Station. Tell our forces to stand down. And someone get me a working radio to Phobos. I need to talk to Detective Thompson before she leaves. The choice was made. Now they would see if this timeline could be different. Meg Thompson stood in front of a small brick building in Circleville, Ohio. The summer air felt strange after so many years on Mars. The date was July 15, 1976, and she had just arrived. Her mind in a new body, just as the messengers had promised. Beside her, Commander Hayes adjusted his 1970s clothing. The messengers had sent him back too, after he made the choice to trust them. They needed both of them here to change history. Mary Wilson works in there, Meg said, looking at the building. Right now, she's just a young scientist. But in our timeline, she becomes Governor Wilson, the one who makes the wrong choice. Unless we change it, Thomas said. They walked into the building, finding a research lab filled with old computers. Mary Wilson sat at a desk, working on complex equations. She looked up as they entered. Can I help you? She asked. Meg took out the silver device the messengers had given her. We're here about Project Timeline, about what happens when you make your breakthrough. Mary's face went pale. How do you know about that? It's classified. Because we've lived it, Thomas said, over and over, across hundreds of years. They showed her everything, the device, the proof, the future they came from. Mary listened, her scientist's mind trying to understand. So in the future, she said slowly, my project leads to time travel, and you've come back to change things. Not to stop it, Meg explained. To do it right this time. The invasion is coming, but humanity can be ready. We just need to prepare properly. Mary looked at her equations again. These calculations, they're wrong. I've been trying to solve them for months. But your device shows the right way. Yes, Thomas said. And now you have a choice. Will you help us? Mary stood up and walked to her filing cabinet. She pulled out a folder labeled Quantum Consciousness Research. I've been getting letters, she said. Strange warnings about the future. About choices and changes. She looked at Meg. You wrote those, didn't you? Meg nodded. I had to keep the loop going until we got to this moment. Mary opened the folder and spread out the letters. Each one led me closer to the right calculations, but they also taught me something else, about responsibility, about choosing the right path even when it's not the easy one. Outside, the sun began to set. In the distance, they heard a police siren. a sound that would be replaced by alien ships in their timeline. "We can save them all," Thomas said. "Earth, Mars, everyone. But we need your help." Mary picked up the silver device, studying it. "This technology, it's not just about time travel, is it? It's about evolution, about becoming something more than human." "Yes," Meg said. "The messengers became what they are to survive. But with your help, we can guide that change, make it better." Mary sat down at her desk and began to write. "Then let's do it right. No more secret letters. No more hiding in the shadows." She looked up at them. "We'll make humanity ready, starting now." As she wrote, Meg felt a strange sensation. The timeline was changing. New memories appeared in her mind. A different future, a prepared humanity, a war they could win. "It's working," Thomas said, feeling it too. "The loop is breaking." Mary finished writing and held up the paper. It wasn't a letter this time. It was a proposal for Project Guardian, a worldwide program to prepare humanity for what was coming. "We'll need to move fast," she said. "Set up the right people, the right projects, build the defenses before they're needed." Meg looked out the window at the peaceful Ohio evening. Somewhere out there, the aliens were coming. But this time, Earth would be ready. Mars would be ready. Humanity would face the future on its own terms. "The circle is broken," she said. "Now we write a new story." The sun set on Circleville, and with it, the old timeline faded away. A new future was beginning, one letter at a time.